All right, so this talk is called She Had a Plan for That, Building an IO Caucus app for the Warren campaign. Um, Originally, the talk was going to be about Tailwind CSS, but this is a crazy world full of change. So if you had your heart set on Tailwind CSS, sorry. But if you're interested, hit me up on Slack. I can send you a link to a past talk I did on Tailwind. Instead, since Senator Warren suspended her campaign 3 weeks ago, which is crazy to think that was only 3 weeks ago, but here we are. A few things have happened since then. Since she suspended her campaign, I can actually talk about some of the cool things that we built. So specifically, this is a talk about the little web app that we built for the Iowa caucuses. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Name is John Jandoc. My hobbies include traveling, going to restaurants, going to concerts, going to crowded movie theaters, and coughing on people. So not great. For the last 8 months, I was working as a software engineer on the Elizabeth Warren campaign. This photo is from 3 weeks ago when Warren announced she was dropping out. That afternoon, she came to the Boston headquarters to give everybody a hug. Unfortunately, I was here in LA, so this is the closest I actually got to meeting her. But she did hug the laptop, so that was nice. However, I did meet her dog, Bailey, up close and personal when I was in Des Moines. He was a very good boy. Prior to the campaign, I worked at a little LA startup called Joy Mode. Rest in peace, Joy Mode. Before that, I was at Blue State, which is a digital agency working with progressive causes, nonprofits. And long before that, in a past life, I was a designer for JDate. I also co-organized the local View meetup in Los Angeles, and I'm a Lunch.js champion. I just started the Northeast LA lunches, but since we're all under quarantine now, I'll be hosting our first virtual lunch in April. So check that out in a week and a half. And then, yeah, while on the Warren campaign, I worked fully remote. So social distancing and video chats is not too big of a change for me. Here's our web team in the Boston office, and you can see I'm there in the laptop. All right, so to start off, I want to talk a little bit about what a caucus is exactly. So in the United States, political parties choose a candidate by having a series of primary contests in every state. Contests are run at the state level, and the parties get to make up their own rules about how things are conducted. The biggest distinction is whether the state will have an election or a caucus. At this point, most states have moved to doing elections, with a few exceptions like Iowa, Nevada, Wyoming, American Samoa, and a few other territories. Iowa, being the first contest in the entire primary season, is the big one. And also apologies to folks who know all this. I've been like super deep in politics as of late, and so I don't have a good sense for what normal people actually know about the system. It's kind of like explaining Redux to your non-tech friends. So I think we all know what an election is. You just mark off your preferred candidate. You go to a polling place or you mail in a ballot, and you're done. Assuming you're going to a polling place and there's no lines, you could be in and out in a few minutes. Things go well. In contrast, caucuses are a little bit more interactive. They organize at the precinct level. So at every precinct, you've got different locations. People then go to those locations. We call them caucus goers. This location is usually a local spot like a school gym or cafeteria, something similar along those lines. So once you're there, you indicate your main preference, who your favorite candidate is, and you break up into candidate groups. So you're actually like physically standing with other fellow supporters in different corners of the room. This is called your like initial alignment. At this point, we determine the groups that are actually viable, groups that meet a viability threshold. So that threshold varies a little bit depending on the precinct, but for the most part, viability means a candidate needs at least 15% of the supporters at that specific precinct location. Anyone in a viable group at that point is locked in, can't change groups. Meanwhile, all the non-viable groups get to break up, realign, join other groups if they want to, or they can go home. The interesting thing here is that you're actually encouraged to, talk face to face with your neighbors and actually do some like person to person campaigning. Uh, you're, you're uh, it's very like in your face democracy, which is pretty different from an election where you go to a polling place and you're not allowed to do any campaigning within 100 feet of that location. That includes like, obviously you can't talk up a candidate to other people, but you can't like wear a t-shirt with a logo. You can't wear buttons. You can't have signs. Like it's very sacred space. But yeah, caucuses are not that. So all right, once people have had a chance to realign, then we can figure out how many delegates to proportionally distribute at that precinct. So just to do a little math, as an example of how that distribution works, let's say we have a precinct that has 10 available delegates. These are precinct level delegates, not like final state level delegates, but we can ignore that math for now. We're just focusing on precinct delegates. All right, so to keep the math easy, we'll assume 10 delegates, there's 100 people that show up for the caucus. The viability threshold is 15%, as I mentioned. So 15% of 100 is 15. A candidate will need at least 15 supporters to be viable. All right, so let's assume people break up into 4 groups like so. Group A, B, C, and D. Group C and D have fewer than 15 supporters, so they're not viable. For the 2 viable groups that are remaining, we split the available total delegates proportionally. So divide number of supporters by total attendees, multiply by total available delegates, and that gives you the raw delegate count. Here we round out the result to figure out final delegates. So 4.3 rounds down, 3.8 rounds up. They both have 4. But since we have 10 available delegates and we've only assigned 8, we're actually able to round up Group A. So they can have now 5 and Group B has 4. That gives us 9 out of 10. If this was the end of the caucus and everybody just went home, that spare delegate would go to undeclared. But since we still need to do a realignment, let's assume that everybody that was in Group D moves to Group C, so making that 19 total supporters for Group C. So now they have a raw delegate count of 1.9. That rounds up to 2. We actually have an overage, so we take away that spare delegate that was given to Group A. And now here's our final delegate allocation, 10 out of 10. Boom. So yeah, pretty easy. Let's say though that the breakdown looks something like this instead, 45, 40, 15. Now both Group A and Group C get to round up because 4.5 and 1.5, that rounds up to 5 and 2 respectively. This, however, gives us kind of an overage, 11 out of 10. Normally we'd take away a delegate from whichever group did the most rounding, but since Group A and Group C did the same amount of rounding, they have a difference of 0.5 each, then we actually have a tie. So in the grand tradition of exciting democratic processes, how we actually resolve this is literally with a coin toss. So whoever wins the coin toss gets the delegate, and this actually happens like more often than you'd think. There's 1,600 to 1,700 precincts in Iowa. So 16 to 1,700 chances for this to resolve itself. So yeah, ties actually do happen quite a bit. 3-way ties even happen. I believe that 1 or 2 might have happened in this last caucus. If that's the case, you'd like pull straws or some other kind of random method. So all right, yeah, hopefully that's not too confusing. At the heart of it, it's just pretty straightforward math. But in reality, you've got a lot of standing around and counting. Just imagine hundreds of people in a gym counting off and then moving around and counting again. The process can take several hours, and if you start like I think that 7 o'clock. Sorry, I think they started at 7 o'clock. So yeah, and this is on a Monday night. So imagine being out late on a school night counting people in a gym. So yeah, to lead things, every precinct has a precinct chair. These are volunteers from the community who are trained months beforehand. Chairs are responsible for ultimately reporting back the results of their caucus back to the Iowa Democratic Party, like the state level party. And then within each candidate group, uh, there's usually a precinct captain. So the precinct captain is a super supporter who's been identified by the campaign. The campaign's like reached out and like, you're great, you're awesome. Can you like be our kind of our main point of contact for this caucus? Can you like rally the troops? So they're identified, they're trained, and they are kind of in charge of doing some of that on the ground strategizing and campaigning and figuring out like Yang wasn't viable in that first alignment, but maybe we can make some friends and like talk to them and convince them to come join us. So it's interesting in that it's like second choice matters, second preference matters. So it's people tend to campaign pretty politely in Iowa, as opposed to some other kind of more negative politics that might show up in later states. All right, so that's basically a caucus. In an effort to help make that caucus process run smoother, the Iowa Democratic Party hired an agency to build an official app that would do the caucus math and post results back. This is not the app that we built. You've probably, if you listen to the news, you've probably heard about the app. That app was built by an agency called Shadow Inc. And as you may have heard, things did not go so well. These were just a few headlines from CNN the night of the caucuses. As the caucuses wrapped up, people were wondering who won, of course. But as the hours passed, it turned out that reporting was being delayed due to a bug in the app. Precinct chairs were getting to the end of the UI flow and having it error out on them. As a backup, people were encouraged to call in their results, but many of them ended up on hold for long periods of time. Yeah, because of all this, they had to kind of fall back to kind of paper trails and official caucus worksheets and results weren't announced until a couple days afterwards. So that's unfortunate. Um, but beyond reporting issues, I personally got to poke around the app a bit, and it was something of a UX nightmare. And as a former designer and a front end guy, I'm pretty sensitive to UX. So just to kind of like talk about a little bit about what it was. Downloading, logging into the app was an ordeal. The the app was built native for iOS and Android, but it also wasn't available on the official app stores. Precinct chairs had to download it through beta testing channels like TestFlight. They then had to set up an account with a strong password. Uh, uh, so like a special character, a number, had to be lowercase, uppercase. They got a sent a verification email that they needed to click on, and then they needed to set up two-factor authentication and enter a PIN for that. And then they had to enter a different 6-digit number that was their like precinct specific PIN that identifies what precinct they're chairing. It was a little bit of a hassle. And then once managed to log in, this is what it looks like, which I'll let that speak for itself. Yeah, you, not my preference on how we arrange a mobile app, but and then of course when you get to the end of all this, imagine seeing the error screen like this and not knowing what to do next. That exclamation point followed by comma just kills me. Yeah, and then like consider the user. This was built for precinct chairs, and precinct chairs are usually older folks. I mean, not to be ageist, but like think about your polling places. Think about the people that are there volunteering, working, for voters. They're usually an older folks. They're probably not the type of folks that know about test flight under normal circumstances. And like the UI in this app, I consider myself pretty tech savvy at this point. but and at this point, I even consider myself pretty Caucus savvy, but even I was having trouble navigating the app. So yeah, not great. And then yeah, beyond the software, just issues in the process behind actually building the app was kind of cringeworthy. Some reports I read said that the precinct chairs weren't trained on the app until a week before the caucuses, maybe 2 weeks. And apparently, Shadow Inc. started building the app only 2 months before the Iowa caucuses. Yeah, some reports say that they were paid $60,000 from the Iowa Democratic Party. Nevada also was Nevada, which is another early state that has caucuses, also paid some money to uh, Shadow, and so maybe like 60K times two. I don't know what you think about that number, but that's and for something that's like an official tool for democracy, I see that as a pretty aggressive timeline with an insanely lowball price tag. Uh, yeah, if you think about like the people involved, you'd need a front end engineer, back end engineer, QA, product manager, designer, all senior level folks, ideally working for like 6 months at the very minimum. So you get what you pay for. Uh, yeah. And then to make things more complicated, there were plenty of people, many of them still on Twitter, who were making whispers about a conspiracy. You may have heard that Pete Buttigieg funded Acronym, which is like parent company of Shadow, and like the system was rigged in favor of the establishment and was working against Sanders. Like, I just want to put that to bed. Like, that's all bullshit. There was no conspiracy. Like, it's pretty unfortunate that Shadow Inc. is named Shadow Inc. That's not a good look. But like, there was no conspiracy. Like, hopefully it should be pretty evident just looking at the app itself and like hearing about the process that like things were doomed from the start. So yeah, again, not great. But meanwhile, in Warren Land, we had been working on our own version of the app. So I started working for Warren at the end of August last year, and I was assigned to work on the app almost immediately. So on top of that, product requirements were already largely defined, so we had about 7 or 8 months of lead time. And yeah, here it is. So yeah, this was a progressive web app built in Vue. Front end was deployed to Netlify, and the reporting backend was on AWS. And yeah, we used Tailwind. If you guys are, I'm happy to talk about Tailwind in a different situation. Yeah, so we went with a web app because the web is awesome. It's accessible to everyone. It's easy to work with. We didn't have any specific hardware needs that would warrant building something native. In truth, it's just like it's a calculator and it posts to an API. Like, nothing too crazy there. And like, considering the volatile nature of the primary and that people were dropping out like a day or two before, the caucuses, we wanted to make sure that we could actually push updates to the app regularly and not have to go through an app store release process. So yeah, this was built mobile first and offline first. We had a pretty clear concept of what our use case was. This was for our precinct captains. They'd be pulling out their devices in school gyms and cafeterias, possibly in remote corners of Iowa. So no assurances for connectivity. This needed to work offline. So yeah, we used service workers to make all this possible. We used local storage to persist app state. If the user didn't have network connectivity and tried to submit results, the request would be queued and fired when they regained the connection. Uh, the uh, the initial versions of the app was ready for training after Thanksgiving. Precinct captains were trained to pin the app to their home screen so that the service worker could cache the entire app ahead of time. They're able to log in and go through the entire process, and we had plenty of time to get user feedback and refine the experience. For testing, we had Jest and Cypress to do unit and end-to-end testing respectively. We also generated 10 million random test cases to prove our math. The first time we ran it, about 99.995% of cases passed, which helped us identify a bug that got us to 100% passing. So, I don't normally consider myself a test-driven developer, but tests are important. So write them. Yeah. And Yeah, so we felt pretty confident in the results, and that any discrepancies were due to human error. This tweet here, one of my proudest moments from the campaign, it's from Daniel Kurtzleben, who's a reporter for NPR and a regular on the NPR Politics podcast. Shout out to the NPR Politics podcast, huge fan. Check it out. But yeah, as you can see, we managed to fix some human error, save ourselves a delegate. Pretty great. A few other tweets from that night. Thank you to Jeff Brown for the name of this talk. Hashtag she had a plan for that. Um, and yeah, thanks to the app, we were able to share the data and photos we collected to help out the Iowa Democratic Party. Uh, and yeah, wasn't all entirely smooth sailing. Thank you to Adam for the talk beforehand. As he mentioned, service worker caching was our biggest problem. What a coincidence. As we were training people, well, we were seeing that some of our trainers still had old versions of the app. Found that the problem was the service worker, it was stale and serving up old cached files. So, in a normal browser, you can open the browser up in an incognito window or a hard refresh, just pound the refresh button a few times, and usually it resolves itself. But once you pin a PWA to your home screen on your phone and you open it from your home screen, you kind of lose the browser Chrome and you lose that built-in refresh button. So we in early to mid January, we built out a little toast notification that would show up anytime it detected that the service worker was updated, saying there's a new version of the app. Click to refresh. That would refresh the app, clear out the old service worker, and run the new one. Of course, the rub is if you have an old version of the app, you don't get the button that gives you the new version of the app, so you wouldn't see that. So yeah, number one lesson from working with service workers for me is build the refresh button first or some kind of means to refresh. Very important. Do that before anyone even installs a service worker on your site. Otherwise, you're going to be in a world of trouble. But yeah, service workers are supposed to update themselves every 24 hours. That's what the internet says. That's what the spec says, and that's a lie. I Googled a little bit, and the internet also said that mobile Safari has been known to hold on to service workers for as much as 2 weeks. So given that we put in the refresh button with more than 2 weeks to spare, we're hoping this would resolve itself, and it didn't. So in the days before the caucus, we were doing dry runs, and we found that some people still had app versions from as early as like Thanksgiving, like the earliest days. People who were in the first round, installed the app, got trained, and then didn't look at it again. Come back on, open it up, it's still the same service worker. So what we did to resolve that was to ask everyone to clear the cache. We prepped a memo with instructions. We emailed precinct captains, and we offered phone support to walk people through it. I love this tweet. The rollout. The second comment here kind of really shows the effort that went into making all this run smoothly. But yeah, again, it's like 1,600 to 1,700 precincts. We didn't have captains in everyone, but most of them. So not beyond reason for us to just call them all or email them all and follow up. Special thank you to this person who lost all their tabs in clearing out their browser history. We appreciate your dedication. But it's good for you. A little Mary Condoing of your open tabs. Good to close tabs that don't bring you joy. All right, so to finish up, the main takeaway I want you all to have here is how much effort is required to do a good job. Like, you've got to do the work. It takes lots of people. I built the front end for the app, but there were back end developers, there's data people, there's a designer, product manager, field organizers, people training volunteers, and then of course the precinct captains themselves. There's phone line operators to take their calls if they needed help. There's like tons of effort here, many people involved. And as tech people, sometimes we need to be reminded of the broader picture, that technology is just a tool, it's not the solution. Here the app itself wasn't the goal. Running in a smooth caucus and hopefully trying to win the thing, that was the goal. So here's a sad thing. When I look back at the Iowa caucuses, I wish my biggest feeling from that experience was pride. You know, I wish that I could be like, man, we look at this awesome work we did, but that's not the case. Instead, my biggest feeling is frustration and disappointment. Like our campaign did the work, but like so did every other campaign. Thousands of people, staffers and volunteers, they organized, they knocked on doors, they packed up and moved to Iowa for a year because they believed in their candidate. So to have all that year worth of effort just overshadowed, wow, that's a pun, I didn't even plan that, but yeah, to have all of their effort overshadowed by headlines of a buggy app and the state Democratic Party in disarray, to have people's faith in our institutions shaken, is just really, really frustrating. So I want to take a moment, regardless of what your political beliefs are or which candidate you backed, I want to take a moment to recognize and acknowledge all the work that's been done by people who participated and who wanted to be a part of shaping our democracy. So, thank you all for fighting the good fight. Also, many of those folks are, unless they're working for Sanders or Biden, many of the folks on those campaigns are unemployed at the moment. So, reach out to anyone. I know some pretty amazing people. Send me any job listings you have, and I can pass them along. But yeah, and then let me just see if the video will play.
And if you think that is the right way to run a campaign, go to ElizabethWarren.com.
I love her. Okay. All right. Thanks for listening. That's my talk. If you have any questions, find me on the js.la Slack, or I guess the stage Zoom room. I'll be there, or send me an email. All right. Thanks a lot.